Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Father-Son Packers podcast, your source for Packers news, notes, and analysis. My name is Tommy. I'm one of your hosts, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, my dad, Matt. Dad, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm got the mic facing the correct way now, so we're rolling.
Okay, if we just want to take you behind the curtain. So after last episode, we were talking about, I was like, wow, the audio quality on your mic, Dad, for some reason, like we have the same mic. I was like, for some reason, it's just like a little different than mine. I don't know why. And then he was
so apparently, listeners, the mic has the word back on it.
Well, he was looking at it, and then I was looking at it through the video. And I'm like, oh, like it's weird that I can see like dials. Like it's weird that it has dials on both sides. And then I look at mine, I was like, mine doesn't have dials on both sides. And so I was like, oh, I can see the front, which means he's talking into the back. So hopefully, apologies for all those.
Now it should be better.
Hopefully, apologies for all those technical issues that you might have noticed in past ones, but hopefully our sound is figured out now.
This is what happens when you record without any reading glasses on.
We're only 54 episodes in. Don't worry about it. But anyway, we are here today to talk to you a little bit about OTAs, which we got a little bit of a peek at on Tuesday when the media was allowed there. They started on Monday. We're recording to you now Wednesday night, May 24th. We'll talk to you a little bit about that. And then we're going to talk a little bit about a deep dive into the two defensive tackles that the Packers drafted in this draft, Colby Wooden and Karl Brooks. But excited to talk about both of them, do our deep dives for them. As you might know, we're doing an episode a week over this offseason. We're still doing our deep dives into all these prospects. We still have to go through Clifford, Carlson, DeBose, Johnson, Valentine, and Lou Nichols. And I believe that is the rest. We got 6 left, so 3 more episodes of those deep dives to go. Maybe 2. We'll see how we're feeling about how we're doing those 7th round picks. But so come listen to those. If you want to hear about previous prospects, the deep dives into those are just an episode or 2 before. So go check those out. We've done all the other ones already. Beyond that, we're going to just be coming to you here. Episode a week, and if you like what you hear, come give us a follow on Twitter at FatherSonPacker. We tweet out when we have new episodes, pieces of news, information, articles we find interesting, cut-ups we find interesting, etc., etc. So come give us a follow there, and then subscribe to us on your podcast platform of choice. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, etc., etc. We even do all our episodes on YouTube as well. If you want to subscribe to us there, it would really help our numbers. But Dad, should we get this underway? We're going to hit some news first. And
yeah, there's some exciting news.
We got some real news before we even get to the OTAs. The 2025 NFL Draft is coming to Green Bay, Wisconsin. How exciting is that?
It's very exciting. It's going to be like a giant street party, all over the area around the stadium. You know, Titletown and wherever else is going to be filling people up. It's going to be, you know, street barbecuing and
everyone out on their lawns,
crowds, and
it's gonna be great. And I'm just so excited.
It'll be April, so it could be really nice weather, or it could be a snowstorm.
You know, one or the other. I'm really excited. I just wanted to first give a shout out to Mark Murphy, Packers president. This has kind of been something he has been
this
working
has been kind
towards.
of his baby for a little while now.
It's been his life's work, and he will be set to retire, I think, right after it
that
happens.
year.
Yeah,
it's like 2025 is when he sort of times out.
Yeah, and so this has kind of been his life's work, and it's good for him to kind of see this through to the end. He's been kind of grinding away at the league office for a little while. I'm sure he's just been wearing them down over time, trying to get them to accept
Did somebody else like, just give him the draft already so he stops calling me?
Yeah, I think he pretty much just wore them down because they've put their name in the hat almost every year now. And then they spoke to him in a bit of a one-on-one interview, and he also wanted to give a shout-out to recently passed executive committee member and Packers treasurer Mark McMullen, who apparently did a lot of work to get this done. And so just he wanted to shout at him specifically. He passed back in February, I guess. And so might as well pass that name along since it's probably someone that would normally get caught up in the shuffle otherwise. But in memory of him, it sounds like it was his life's work as well. Dad, what were your initial reactions to the draft being in Green Bay? It's exciting. I'm a little curious about the logistics, but it's exciting is the main thing.
Yeah, it is. It's going to be kind of fun. It's going to be, you know, it's a football town.
Yeah.
And so people are going to show up and party, you know, and when, you know, if people are whining about they're not getting the amenities they want, you know, who cares?
They'll figure it out. I'm sure the league...
people who
The league would not give it to Green Bay if they thought that they weren't going to be able to handle the logistics of it.
And the NFL draft, the people who show up for the draft in droves, those are the real junkies.
Yeah.
And who just kind of love football, and they dress up and they put on their costumes and their paint. You see them there, and if you watch the draft, those are the kind of people who are going to love being in Green Bay near Lambeau and having like this whole street festival all around football there.
Yep. Just got to hope the weather holds out, I think, is the biggest thing. But I think the rest is going to be awesome.
Yeah, a few snowflakes would make it perfect.
Well, I don't know if you remember a couple of years ago when it was in Minnesota, people were complaining about how cold it was, but, whatever.
Yeah, but so it could be chilly. It could be snow. It's not going to be, January or February where it could be, 10 below.
That would probably not fly.
They wouldn't do it. That's why they're not going to have a Super Bowl there.
Exactly. It's a shame, but that is why. But anyway, that's the big piece of news. Beyond that, Dad, though, let's go into a quick breakdown of OTAs. Yeah,
a lot of stuff. A lot of news came out during the OTAs, open to the media yesterday on Tuesday. We thank you, media members, for giving us updates.
Oh yeah, shout out Matt Schneidman, Andy Herman, Wes Hodkowitz, Mike Spofford, Ryan Wood, etc.
Rob
Domofsky. I'm sure there's a bunch that I'm forgetting, but shout out all of them tweeting through everything that's going on. I always look forward to the open media sessions, and I'm reloading, I'm refreshing Twitter every 10 seconds, just like, okay, what was the next play? All right, what was the next play? Okay, what happened on the next play? I don't know. I'm just a junkie for it all. But Dad, we got some stuff here, some news. I think the first thing to start with is attendance. Who was there and who was not there? Remember, these are optional. That's what the O stands for. So no one is required to be there. Some people get bonuses for being there, but players don't come. They don't have to. It is what it is. But players that were not present were David Bakhtiari, Elton Jenkins, Jair Alexander, Rasul Douglas, Jonathan Garvin, Dallin Levitt, Preston Smith, and these were per Rob Domofsky. Along with note that Levitt, Bakhtiari, Jenkins, and Preston have been there for other parts of the offseason, but just were not there on Tuesday, I guess. So, a lot of the vets didn't come. A lot of this is like initial installs of the offense and defense, so stuff that they probably already know. Other vets were there, like Kenny Clark and Aaron Jones, but like we said, optional. They don't need to be there. So those are the main attendance things, and then unfortunately, always got to talk about injuries this time of year, Dad.
Yep, and so the two big injuries, Rashawn Gary and Eric Stokes, they were there rehabbing on the side, and we got some news finally about Stokes' injury. Because it was originally announced as a combination knee and ankle injury, and then we didn't hear anything more about what exactly it was and how long it would take. So he spoke to the media. He said he suffered a meniscus tear and a Lisfranc injury. One thing I missed is whether it was both on the same leg or not. But both, so they did surgery for both of them at once in November and put a plate in his foot for the Lisfranc injury, and that he was in a wheelchair until like January.
Yeah,
mid-January, I think after the season ended, because it's probably one of those where they put the plate in your foot, and having had some foot surgery, there's a time period where you can't put any pressure or like flex it at all.
And you said
so that's probably what's going on.
And you said you weren't sure if it was the same leg. I wasn't entirely sure if the plate was still in there, if that's something that he would have had it taken out, or if it's a plate that's permanent.
Is probably permanent, as opposed to a pin. It's probably a permanent plate.
Yeah, but we don't know as something.
So as opposed to the bones being pinned as a plate, it's most likely permanent.
But unclear. It wasn't really clear based on the way the question was answered, at least. But it is good to at least get some news on Stokes. He was warming up a little bit with the team. I don't know if you saw those videos.
Doing a little twist jumping and spinning, and he said he's just started running 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, it was a very major injury, and we knew that because we hadn't heard anything. So it is nice to at least get some news on it. Lisfrancs are generally very tricky. It can be hard to get back your full speed, and Stokes being a player that relies a lot on his speed, that it can be a bit worrisome. But, hoping for the best for him, excited that he's back out on the field, at least moving around. He's not really practicing, but he's moving around. But then on to Rashawn Gary.
Well, I just want to say that he's also getting some advice from Patrick Taylor.
Yes.
Who had the same injury his final year at Memphis. basically missed that year, and took a while before he was able to start playing after he joined the Packers.
Yeah, so I know the initial reporting was they might have Stokes back by week 1. I'm not going to super hold out hope for that. That feels a little hopeful.
And the way they're talking about the lineup in the secondary, it doesn't sound like they're planning for him to be ready in week 1. Let's put it that way.
And then for Gary, he also was not practicing. He was with the rehab group as well. But sounds like he's at least progressing. We'll see. The thing with Gary, though, that was interesting that I heard someone note is that their opening 2 games are at Soldier Field on that god-awful grass.
Right.
And then at Atlanta.
On AstroTurf.
On AstroTurf. So
yes.
Are they really going to have him play in either of those games? That was a good point made by...
And then week 3 is at Lambeau, and where's week 4?
Yeah. But that's something to keep in mind. So those 2 players...
Because if he goes on PUP, then it's 4 games.
Yeah. And then also not practicing were offensive tackle Gene DeLance, offensive lineman Jake Hansen, running back Lou Nichols, they're one of their 7th-round picks, wide receiver Jeff Cotton, and then also wide receiver Grant DuBose did not practice, one of their 7th-round picks. I don't know if you saw that as well. And then, unfortunately, Quay Walker appeared to get some kind of injury during drills and didn't do the 11-on-11. And apparently, Andy Herman said he was limping around quite a bit on the sidelines. So we're hoping that's not anything long-term.
But he stayed out there and was kind of mirroring, I think, the way it was described. He's like at the end of the field or somewhere, like kind of mirroring the play and keeping an eye on it, moving around. So
yeah, but then
it wasn't so bad that they sent him inside.
But after that, Andy said he was limping around quite a bit on the sidelines. So we'll see if maybe he's just trying to make it through it. But Dad, some interesting roster notes. Let's move off the kind of downer side and talk a little bit about some interesting things we found in terms of lineups that they were using. The first of which is on the offensive line, where Bakhtiari and Elton were not there, but they went Yosh Nijman at left tackle, Royce Newman at left guard, Josh Myers at center, John Runyon Jr. at right guard, and Zach Tom at right tackle. And you brought up something very interesting that I took some convincing on, but I now agree with.
Right. So I saw that, and it made me think that the plan right now, so this is always a snapshot, things can change, is that Tom is ahead of Yosh at right tackle. And that Yosh is filling in at left tackle for Bakhtiari because Yosh is like the swing tackler or one further down on the totem pole. And they're having players stay in their primary positions when possible. So they had Runyon at right guard, Myers at center. Royce Newman is obviously the backup in the interior. And so he went in at Jenkins' spot where Jenkins isn't here. So I think for now, it's looking like for the right tackle spot, Tom is ahead of Nijman.
Yeah, and I initially pushed back on this because I was like, oh, they're probably just going with the lineup that like they would trot out if they had these players. But then you pointed out that, hey, with Royce Newman at left guard, like if they were going with the lineup that they would go with if these were the only 5 they had, they would almost certainly go Runyon at left guard and then Newman at right guard since they have more experience there. They've both played
and when they played together, they did that before, the 2 of them.
And so the fact that Runyon is staying at right guard makes it seem like they're just getting them reps where they would play if Bakhtiari and Elton were there. And so that makes you think that Tom is at right tackle because that's where he would be playing if Elton and Bakhtiari were there, which is exciting because I think we saw a lot from Tom. Me personally, I don't know if you saw the clips of him during OTAs from Tuesday. I thought he looked a little bigger. I thought he had looked like he put on some good weight.
I saw you tweet that, and I think I saw somebody agree with your comment on that.
And I love when people agree with me. It's my favorite thing.
Could do that all day.
Exactly. I like any comment that agrees with me. But yeah, so that's for the offensive line. Beyond that, in 11-on-11 drills for the red zone, they repped red zone a lot. They started in 12 personnel per Andy Herman with DeGuara at tight end. And then, did they start at 21? I could have sworn they started at 12.
No, so what I saw from Andy Herman is that, at least for the 11-on-11s, the lineup he gave was Jones and Dillon both in, with just the one tight end, DeGuara, and then Watson and Dobbs. I think there may have been some earlier in the practice lineups that were in 12 personnel, where they had DeGuara and Musgrave. But when they got to the 11-on-11s, this is what Andy Herman tweeted as the lineup.
Okay, because that was one that I had thought I had seen that they started in 12 personnel with Musgrave and DeGuara.
Yeah, and they may have done that earlier in the practice, just not in the 11 on 11s.
Yes, fair enough. And then the defense
I'm making stuff up.
started in nickel in team drills with Clark and Slayton inside, Enigbare and Hollins at edge, so no Lucas Van Ness with the ones yet. McDuffie in for Quay Walker next to Campbell. And then Keandre Thomas, Corey Ballantyne at outside corners with Jair and Rasul not being there. And then Keyshawn Nixon starting in the slot. And then at safety, Darnell Savage and Rudy Ford got the nod at safety, at least to start with the ones. Dad, what do you think about that call?
I'm not surprised that they would at least start here, since Ford started some games at safety for them last year.
Knows the
so
system
that would
already.
be the right. He's in the system. He knows it. We'll see how it goes, because even though he's had snaps with Green Bay as safety, there are other players they've added who have more starting safety experience.
Yeah.
In Owens, especially having been the starter for an entire 17-game season, and even Moore has had some snaps at safety, though.
Moore's played safety in the Super Bowl. So
yeah, but though after his injury,
yeah, he is more of a special team.
He's been playing more special teams last year anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm also not surprised. I thought Ford was pretty good when he played safety last year. I didn't think he was anything amazing, but he's at least a pretty good tackler, which you can't. They need at least one pretty good tackler at safety, please. At least one would be nice.
Owens is a good tackler.
That's true.
If I recall, when we looked at the additive, he's a good tackler.
He graded out quite well as a tackler last year for the Texans. And
then we'll see what Anthony Johnson Jr. can provide.
Yeah, didn't hear much from him. Speaking of rookies,
no, I'm thinking about that, and I don't know if I saw a tweet that mentioned him.
Yes, but rookie watch at the OTAs. Some pieces of note: Van Ness looking good versus the twos. Jaden Reed got the starting snaps in the slot, although he did have a fumble. But otherwise, I heard he looked pretty good. It seems. Wicks had a nice deep grab from Jordan Love, but did have LaFleur chastise him for not finishing a play at one point, which is what it is. They're rookies. They're going to make rookie mistakes.
Yeah, that deep grab was like a 55-yard bomb from Love.
Yeah.
I think that was against air. I don't think it was a
it was not an 11-11s. It was just on air. I don't think they really do 1v1s in practice at OT.
Maybe they're not doing 1v1s. Maybe they're just doing the versus air and then 11-11s.
Musgrave got the starting snaps at tight end. Colby Wooden got some work rotating in with the ones. And then Sean Clifford is currently third on the depth chart, with Danny Etling being second. The other thing out of OTAs is Jordan Love. It sounds like he kind of started a little slow, but then kind of worked his way into it. They did a lot of off-script stuff. It seems like mostly it was a pretty nondescript practice from him. Some good, some bad. Couple misses, couple drops. Nothing really to glean other than that he looked okay. Had some good throws, had some bad throws. It's just OTAs. Yeah. Most of these guys he's never really thrown to before. Yeah,
though one thing I'd say, so it sounded like he started off kind of rough when they got to the passing plays against the defense, with some batted balls, some off-target throws, some questionable decisions, but got better as the practice went on. And sounded like he did quite well in the 10-yard and in drills.
Yes,
through multiple touchdowns. People talk about their really nice throws, fitting into tight windows. So that part was encouraging. At least that he finished strong.
Yeah, he had 3 or 4 passes batted down, which is obviously something you got to work on.
Yes, somebody just said that T.J. Slayton pulled a Dikembe Mutombo on him.
Yep. And then some slight roster moves. Packers sign rookie wide receiver Jadakiss Bonds from Hampton. Kind of a bigger body receiver, and dropped tight end Nick Gugamos. And then they also signed running back Emmanuel Wilson and cut kicker Parker White. So only Anders Carlson left on the roster at kicker. Kind of seems like they're leaning towards him for the job. But yeah, those roster moves. Dad, anything else out of OTAs you want to touch on, or should we get into these deep dives on Wooden and Brooks?
I think that's the main thing. It's I would say the things you can glean is we got a little bit of a sign of maybe their ideas, at least at the moment, for some of the lineups, and the rookies are getting worked in already. So for some of them, anyway, we could hear that some of them are making plays. So
yeah,
that's encouraging.
Speaking of one of those rookies that is getting worked into lineups, like we said, Wooden getting some reps with the ones. Let's talk a little bit about Colby Wooden, the Packers' 4th-round pick. We're doing deep dives into him and Karl Brooks today, but let's start with Wooden. So, Colby Wooden, defensive tackle / kind of edge out of Auburn. Pick 116, fourth round in this year's NFL draft. 22 and a half years old. And let's start a little bit with our initial reactions. Dad, what did you think when they made this pick?
So when they made it, I was like, okay, I was expecting a defensive tackle somewhere between rounds 2 and 4, depending on how everything else went down, how many picks they actually ended up with, depending on how many trades they made. And so from that perspective, I wasn't that surprised. Now, Wooden personally was not a player I had been following that much. So that bit of it, in terms of which defensive lineman they picked, caught me a little off guard. And there are some that I liked had gone just shortly before, like
Jacqueline Roy, I think, was one that you were a little.
Well, no,
on.
Roy was still available, which is interesting.
Okay.
That they did not pick Roy, even though they had him in for a visit when he was still there. But the guy from Wisconsin.
Oh, I'm not sure which one. Because you said that, and my mind immediately went Benton, and I can't kick Benton now. And I know it's not Benton. But anyway.
No, it's Keanu. No, yeah.
No, he went in second.
Right, but I mean, yes.
Oh, you mean way before. I see.
Some way before,
yes.
But the most immediate before. And then there are players like Moro Ojomo, I like that, didn't go till much later. But and then the guy, Zach Pickens, is another one who went not too long before, who I thought was a possibility.
Adebare went a little bit before. He went at the top of the fourth round.
Right. So and it may be that they picked Wood instead of Roy because even though they brought Roy in for the interview, it's like, oh, I didn't think this guy was going to still be here.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. For me, my initial reaction was I'm just excited that they made an investment along the D-line. That was my initial reaction when they first made the pick, because they definitely need someone to eat the snaps vacated by Reed and by Lowry, because those guys had pretty much, the second and third most snaps along the line of any player on the Packers last year. I think
by a good margin.
Yeah. And so they got to get bodies to eat those snaps, and right now it was just going to mostly be Wyatt and Slayton with no one behind them. So they needed depth there. So that was the main initial reaction. Was I was just glad that they were investing at that position when they picked Wooden where they did. Let's talk a little bit about Wooden as a prospect, though. So he did play D-tackle and edge while at Auburn, but it sounds like Green Bay is going to use him more so at defensive tackle. And apparently he's up to 283 pounds now and possibly looking to pack on even more weight based on the initial interview he did during rookie minicamp. Dad, do you want to talk a little bit about his athletic profile and how he just physically matches up for that position?
Right. So he's highly athletic. It kind of fits the profile of most of the Packers picks in the last 5-6 years, where 5 of their 7 defensive lineman picks had a RAS of almost 8, 7.96 or higher. And Wooden had a RAS of 9.24. He's, and that's mostly dragged down by his weight. So that's the only thing where he did poorly at. I guess also the bench is a little low. So he's very light as a defensive tackle at 273 pounds. And PFF even lists him as an edge rusher. And so one of the questions is, how much will his athleticism be dragged down by adding the extra pounds to hold up at that position? He's the second fastest defensive tackle in both the 40 and I think the 20 and 10-yard splits, behind only Devontae Wyatt of the Green Bay defensive line draft picks. And he had the best broad jump among all of them, and probably the best combined agility score if you look at both the short shuttle and the 3-cone. He did well at almost everything. So he was elite speed, great agility, very good broad. Did he have the he didn't do the vert, so we don't know how he did that. And his height is actually pretty good, and his arm length and hand size are both pretty good as well. He's got 33 3/4 inch arms and 10 3/8 inch hands. He's got the longest arms of, Kingsley Kiki's not on the the team anymore, but Kiki had the longest arms for their drafted D tackles in the last 6 years, and Wooden's now got the longest on the team among the D linemen with 33 3/4. For comparison, Wyatt was only 32 5/8, is more than an inch longer than Wyatt's, or Ford's, or Slayton's.
Yeah. And that arm length of 33 3/4 inches is 70th percentile for amongst defensive tackles. So definitely in that upper echelon.
Yeah, so he's got a lot of nice traits. He didn't participate in the Senior Bowl, so there's some like on-field tracking numbers we don't have for him. That
he wasn't a senior, so.
Oh.
Yes, so that would be why. I think he's a redshirt junior. So I think they are technically allowed to participate if they graduate, but maybe he didn't hit those markers. But yes, so not a senior, so not going to be in the senior.
Right. So we don't. So there's good reason for why, but we don't have those on-field like speed measurements. We have some for Brooks, that we'll talk about later, that we covered for some of the receivers that we talked about last week.
Yeah,
but overall, his profile kind of fits with what they usually do.
Yes, and you mentioned Kingsley Keke. He reminds me a lot of Kingsley Keke, which we'll talk a little bit about when we talk about our initial thoughts on the player. Because it's to me, it's a player that was kind of played out of position a lot in college. They kind of played undersized a bit in college, but might be able to put on more weight. And that when given more of a full-time role in a more defined role where they're always playing in the same spot and they don't need to move up and down the line as much, might be a lot more productive. And, Kingsley Keke, despite not being with the Packers and not getting a second contract with them, I don't think that really had anything to do with his on-field production. And I think, honestly, for a fifth rounder, was a very good pick. So if Colby Wooden can be a Kingsley Keke-sized impact in the fourth round, that would not be the worst thing. But, Dad, should we talk a little bit about his production in college? Because there was a decent amount of it.
There's a decent amount, and we can talk about his versatility and his weight and his alignment and things. So,
yeah, I'll take this one.
You want to do that? Okay.
I'll take over for this one. You took the athleticism. I'll take the production on this one. So the thing with Wooden is he was kind of used differently year to year, is the first thing to know with him. So in 2020, when he was in his first year, I think he was a redshirt freshman, and in 2022, he was used much more along the edge. In 2020, he played over 60% of his snaps outside the tackle, so as more of a true edge. And then in 2022, he played close to about 50%, or maybe 45% of his snaps outside on the edge in outside the tackle. So that's point A to keep in mind. So that is not really where he's going to be playing much for the Packers. It sounds like they're going to try and keep him more along the interior D line based on what we've heard from both him and then from some Packers personnel based on the quotes that we've heard from them. So those corresponded with a 68.6 overall PFF grade in 2020 and a 72.1 overall PFF grade in 2022, which are both very solid. However, in 2021, he was lined up in the B gap on 70% of his snaps, so that's between the guard and the tackle on either side, and that corresponded with his best overall grade, an 80.2 overall grade, which is bordering on elite. So, for me at least, it seems like that 2021 production is kind of what I want to look at the most when I'm looking at him, because it corresponds best to the role he's going to be playing in the NFL with the Packers. So that's not to say he was bad in those other years. I mean, he made the All-SEC freshman team in 2020 with 9.5 tackles for loss and 4 sacks, according to Ryan Wing of Fox 11. And a lot of people were actually touting him at that time as the guy to keep an eye on in the SEC who might end up being a first-round pick a couple years down the line. A lot of people were talking about him as the next best Auburn defender. However, in 2022, or 2021 that is, he had his career best pressure rate with 11.6%. And then he had, where is it? There we go. 7 sacks and 8 hits with 26 hurries. And in 2021, he actually led SEC interior D linemen with 41 hurries, outpacing Georgia defensive tackle Jalen Carter, who many people thought was the best player in this draft. And he only fell because of some off-the-field concerns. So you can see when he was kind of let allowed to play in that interior D lineman role on a more full-time basis. He was one of the better players in the SEC, which is the highest level of competition for essentially any place in college football. When you're playing at Auburn, you're playing the Alabamas of the world, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In terms of his whole career, 101 career pressures and 17 career sacks, an 8.9% run stop rate for his career. He did have the worst missed tackle rate of his career in 2022 at 24.1%, but his previous years were just 10% and 18.4%. That 10% was when he was playing in the interior D-line, where he's going to be playing with Green Bay, where he played his best football.
Right. So he had his best tackling rate, best pressure rate,
best everything.
When he was playing inside.
Exactly.
And
go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, and some of the things you could see, and maybe we could talk about this a little bit more, but he is a penetrator.
Yes. Especially
when he's one-on-one. He is looking, and he's got some moves, too, to swim or slap and get the guard out of his way to split the gap between the guard and the tackle a lot of the time, and get in the backfield, get upfield in a hurry.
Yeah, and there are definitely some things like watching his tape that I am not super in love with, which we'll talk a little bit about when we talk about our initial reactions, but you can't knock the athleticism and you can't knock the production when he was put in that interior D-line spot. Now, you can argue that maybe when he's a little undersized and when you're going against NFL level size, that might be more difficult for him. But give him the opportunity to put a little bit more weight on and not have to shift up and down the line as much. And, maybe he'll be able to do some more. Dad, should we move on to some of the scout quotes about him, or should we talk a little bit any more about the production you wanted to point out?
Let's see.
Well, while you look, I'll just say a couple of things that scouts had to say about him. Dane Brugler of The Athletic had him as his 10th ranked defensive tackle, a 3rd to 4th round grade on him. Quote, Wooden isn't consistently disruptive when rushing from the outside, but he can set the edge or reduce down where his rush skills are more effective on the interior. He offers position flexibility as a rotational base end or 3 technique as an NFL rookie capable of ascending to starter. And then PFF had him as their defensive tackle 22, 136th overall, so closer to like a 5th round pick. So bit of a disconnect there in terms of The Athletic liking him more, with Dane Brugler liking him more, and then PFF not liking him quite as much. PFF had written, quote, He's a versatile player who's played all over the Tigers' defensive line. In 2020 and 2022, he played mostly as an edge defender. In 2021, he was mostly an interior defensive lineman and had arguably his best season, as his 41 pressures led all SEC interior defensive linemen, beating out Georgia's Jalen Carter, like I said. At 284 pounds, Wooden projects more on the inside at the next level, but can still play some snaps along the edge. Anything while I was reading those off that you had from the production, or should we talk a little bit about what Green Bay has to say about him?
Well, I think you may have covered all the thing about his pass rush win rate and some of those in the run defense grade. His run defense grade for being a lighter defensive tackle is actually not bad. You consider over his career that he's kind of playing undersized as a D tackle. He's actually holding up okay. And some of this is my own observation, watching him, hold up against a double team even if he's not getting penetration. He was getting double teamed a fair amount of time too in some of the games I saw against like Penn State and Alabama and somebody else. I can't remember what the other one was. But so he also setting a decent edge as well against the run. Though he does, you can see kind of different every once in a while against the run. He will play off the block. So it's like hold the block and then just shed him. Throw him to the side when the running back is committed to a side. Though most of the time, he is looking to kind of swim or get skinny and dive upfield. And there have been some times where he has left a gap open on the other side for the running back to go through.
Well, since we're already talking about it, do you want to talk a little bit about our initial impressions of watching him play? Do you want to kind of expound on what you just said and talk a little bit more about that?
Okay, so I mentioned some of the things already that I was a little surprised initially that they didn't go with Jaquelin.
I think it's
Jaquelin. Where you at?
I think it's Jaquelin, or I don't think it's Jacqueline. I think it's Jaquelin Roy. But yes, it is exactly the Key and Peele skit.
Yep. And that since they had him in for a visit and he was still there, they didn't pick him. But as I said, maybe they didn't even expect Wooden to last this long. Wooden was more productive than Roy was at LSU, and is very, very athletic. So you can see why they could have made that choice. I think overall Wooden kind of walks the line between being like super athletic and also providing some production. Even if most of these is not elite production, he's in a high-level conference in the SEC. He's a lead athlete, and he's giving some decent production. And so that's something that I think most teams will bet on.
Oh, 100%.
Right. And then in watching the highlights, as I mentioned, like his primary strategy is to try to shoot the gap, get in the backfield, try to get the ball carrier for a loss, or to go after hunt the quarterback.
He's a one gap penetrator. He's not going to two gap. He's not eating up space. He's not a space eater at all. And that was something.
And I saw maybe like one or two reps where he's like locking up with the blocker and then trying to shut him. And then when he's double teamed, he's not really getting anything in the pass rush, though he's not getting blown off the line either in the run, I would say, from what I saw. And one thing I was thinking about, maybe, especially early in his career, he might be more of a pass rush specialist, which wouldn't be surprising. But in some ways, even at 283 that he is now, he could almost pass rush as like a stand-up nose, like Za'Darius is doing.
Yeah.
At that weight.
I don't know.
I mean, it may be that you'd only trust elite players to do that.
Yeah, I don't know if I
don't expect it.
I was gonna say maybe he profiles there. I don't personally see that much twitch. Like I know he is technically testing wise a better athlete than Za'Darius, but I watch him play and I don't think there's some disconnect there.
You know what it is for what Za'Darius could do, even though he didn't test as an elite athlete. Shortest possible path to the quarterback,
but also
because you go right through
one of the strongest football players I've ever
seen. And
so
that allowed him to just bull half man and go and take the shortest route to the quarterback. So he didn't, because he's going like half as far as other players, he doesn't have to be as fast.
I once heard him described as a flexible brick of muscle, and that is, I think, the best way to describe him. For me, though, getting back to Wooden, my personal thoughts on him. I like the addressing the defensive line, like I said. However, I am a little concerned at the type of player that they went with here, namely that I feel like they are getting a bit redundant. As you said, Wooden is kind of profile-wise in terms of his size, is going to look like more of a sub-package pass rush specialist, or at least early
and
on
also
in his
his
career.
style.
And style. He's not a bad run defender, but that's not his specialty. And he's a penetrator, like we said. He's a one-gap penetrator. So bit of a sub-package pass rush specialist, like I said. But that's kind of mainly what Wyatt provided last year, as well, as he struggled a bit against the run, which seems to be why he didn't play much. Kind of, you can infer that based on comments by Joe Barry in his presser. And then add on to that the fact that they drafted Lucas Van Ness, who you figure to have be pinching inside on obvious passing downs. And I'm not really sure where the snaps are going to be for Wooden, at least early. So I have concerns regarding the fit, because I feel like he would be the worst of the three of those as a sub-package, pinching inside rusher. And they like to do that with Gary as well. So I'm not really sure where the snaps are for him on those passing downs that he would be best suited for. And also, I do feel like when I watch him play, when I watch him rush the passer, there are times where, he just gets stonewalled a little too easily at times. I feel like he just gets stood up and then can't go anywhere if he doesn't win the initial engagement. He doesn't really have any kind of secondary movement at all that he does. If they get both hands on him, he's just kind of moving side to side, just looking at the quarterback. I feel like is based on
he
when
has
I
a
watched
decent
him.
number of reps where if he doesn't win early, then not much happens.
Yes, but ultimately, it is a mid-round pick on a guy who had great production at the highest level of college football. He's an elite athlete, albeit his size is smaller, and you wonder if he puts on that weight, whether or not he can maintain that athleticism. And he's really giving me a lot of Kingsley Keke vibes, like I said earlier. And then everything you hear about him as well is that he was an excellent leader at Auburn. one of their like main locker room guys, one of their main voices, and his interviews are very
his interviews
funny.
are kind of fun. He's
got a lot of character. He's got a lot of character,
Yeah.
a lot of charisma.
He's having a good time. It's like I'm happy to be here. What was the? I was trying to find. He had like this great quote
about playing in the snow, and he'd never played in the snow before.
Oh, that's.
And then he had another fun quote about if anyone had made any cheese-related puns to him yet. And then he was like, no, but I know that they're coming. And someone said, do you think if you get a sack, they'd call it like not Colby Jack, but a Colby sack? Like, and he was like, ooh, that's a good one. I'll have to take that and put it in the pocket or something like that. But no, so I have not really concerns. It is a mid-round pick. I understand the bet on the production and the athleticism. I have like the tape is what it is and the size is what it is. I have questions about what his role is going to be early on, but they needed defensive linemen, and if he was the highest on their board for that, you just kind of take the pick there. He's already working in with the ones, which is good, so we'll see what happens. They don't exactly have a lot of depth there, so like a guy goes down, they do need someone to come in and take those snaps is the other thing. But let's talk a little bit about what Green Bay has to say about him. Just a couple quotes here. Wooden himself said he's going to put some more weight on to play inside, and then Patrick Moore, the assistant director of college scouting, said Colby Wooden will be defensive tackle / big end player for the D-line. So I kind of see him in a bit of the Reed / Lowry role. I think more closer to the Lowry role, I would guess. And then Moore again said, quote, I think he's definitely quick. I think he's athletic. Some guys are quick but aren't necessarily loose athletes. And this was Ryan Wood tweeted this out. But yeah, so that's kind of all we really have to say about Wooden that way. Dad, anything else you wanted to add on with him before we move on to Karl Brooks?
Well, just a little bit thinking about, whether we think it was a smart pick or not in terms of like where he went and what they could have done else, in a different direction. So here's the 12th defensive tackle taken, and well, it's either right about on or a reach depending on who you believe of the scouts.
Yep.
And other players they could have picked one of the quarterbacks before the run. That then led to them getting Clifford. Everybody thought a little early. There are a number of quarterbacks: Stennett, Toon, Thompson Robinson, Hainer, that were all available there. John Gaines, the guard that we liked from UCLA. Or they could have gone with Howden, a safety we liked, or Abanaconda. Go for running back a little earlier and then wait on the D tackle, because they did have a second pick in the 4th round that they used on Clifford in the end, right?
Second pick in the 5th round that they used on Clifford.
Clifford was the 5th round pick. Mm-hmm. Sorry, but they did have other picks coming up. They could have. So that was, but overall, I think it was time.
Yeah.
To start stocking the D line group, because they lost like 1,000 snaps or something from last year, maybe more.
It might be more up 1,100, 1,200. And
so they needed to add multiple D linemen because they didn't do anything in free agency either.
Yeah, and speaking of adding multiple D linemen, let's move on to Karl Brooks, who the Packers took, defensive tackle out of Bowling Green. He's 23 years old, took with pick 179 in the 6th round. Dad, what was your initial reaction when they took Brooks?
So let's see. We're now with 179. We're in one of their 5th round.
6th.
No, this is the 6th round pick. This is the one they added when one of the trade backs. This is the 6th round pick. So he's 23 years old from Bowling Green, from the MAC, where it's
a group of 5 school. No, it is what it is.
They struggle when they go up against higher competition. But I didn't really know too much about him when he was picked. I was expecting actually 2 or 3 D tackles to get picked. So I was expecting like one early in like the 3rd or 4th round, and then maybe, depending on who was there, one in the 5th, and then maybe one in the 7th in my own mock drafts. So, but I was expecting, a player that I was thinking they'd take around here, and who I was opting, it was like Moro Ojomo from Texas, who was younger at 21.7 instead of 23 years old, and much more athletic. And longer arms. So he's 9'1" for versus 5'8", but not nearly as productive as Brooks, who was just crazy productive. So some of it is, I was not surprised by, the position again, because they need multiple players to fill. They lost 2, and so now they've only added 2. Though maybe I'm surprised by who it was. Did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, my initial
Your initial
thoughts
reaction?
My initial reaction was this is the classic Packers double up strategy. You just take a couple players at the same position of need, like they did with receiver a long time ago when they hit the EQ MVS Jamon Moore triple. When they did it with running backs with Aaron Jones, Jamal Williams, Devontae Mays. I mean, they do this all the time.
They've done it with linemen multiple years, like 3 linemen in like 2 or 3 years in a row.
This is the classic multiple swings of the bat at the same position.
You know, it's interesting to say that because I had to. Not only are they multiple swings in the same position, but almost identical kinds of players.
Yeah, in terms of pass rush specialists.
The
receivers were all like bigger, longer, long striders. It's true.
Yeah. So these two D tackles they're both D tackles and they play in the same way.
Yes. And let's talk a little bit about they play similarly, but they also don't, because one of them is not the best athlete, and his name is
I would
Karl
say the things they have in common is they're mostly pass rushers, and so they like to try to gap penetrate. And there was one other thing I was going to compare them to. Well, anyway, however, and then multiple linemen, on the edge and interior. So they both kind of check both of those boxes.
Yes.
However, if you look at the physical profiles.
Talk a little bit about the physical profile, because this is where the concerns for Brooks are the lack of like high-level competition, and then the physical testing the athletic testing was not great. Right.
So his RAS is only 5.87. If you compare that to other D tackles that the Packers have drafted, he would be the second worst athlete on the team, ahead of only Jonathan Ford of their draftees at 3.
Who is worse than that?
Oh, Jonathan Ford's is 3.62.
No, I remember. He's just big. He got all of his RAS from being big.
Right. And Brooks is 5.87. Brooks is still above average. He's just not an elite athlete. He has, so the things that kind of drag him down, he has the worst vertical of all of the D tackles they've drafted, even worse than Ford, who outweighs him by 30 pounds.
I want to note. Actually, go ahead. No, just go ahead.
And he's got the tied with Ford for the worst shuttle, and has the second worst 20 and 10 yard splits, all to Jonathan Ford, who is a nose, which is kind of a different position and a different athletic profile that they have not yet separated out. But really, you're looking for very different kinds of body types and testing for a run stuffing nose versus a pass rushing end.
Yeah, it's separated on Mock Draftable for their spider charts, but it is not separated on RAS. You are correct. But yeah, I will say though, in Karl Brooks' defense, I feel like when I watch him play, he does not look like that bad of an athlete. I know he doesn't look like crazy
and it's
athlete,
not. I mean, it's not. He's still, as an athlete, he's way better than Ford by 20 percentage points.
At least a leap and half a bound, like.
Right. But everybody else besides Ford, their RAS is in like the 80s or 90s, and Brooks is in the 50s.
Yeah, but the allure with Brooks though is not with his athleticism. It is definitely with his tape and his production, and we'll talk a little bit about his production now, unless you have anything else you wanted to add on the athleticism side.
Well, I also looked. So he did go to the Senior Bowl, so they had some speed measurements on him, and I've separated out of my position over the last 6 years where they're doing measurements, and he's still in like the bottom third in most of the speed metrics, except for maximum deceleration. That's the one thing he was above average in.
And I don't know if you mentioned, but he is 6'3", 300 pounds.
Right, yeah, they had him at 6'3", 303. Oh, and he's got short arms. At 31 and a half inches is the shortest arms of any of their draftees over the last 6 years.
He's just built like Kalijah Kancey, but not an elite athlete. It's fine. It's whatever. Don't worry about it.
And he was more productive, at least in the pass rush, than Kancey.
And let's talk a little bit about that production. So one thing to keep in mind is he did line up a lot at edge rusher outside of the tackle, like a lot for a 300-pounder at least, especially in his last
300-pound edge rusher.
Yeah, at least especially in his last 2 years of college. So he's kind of a weird player to evaluate because you're pretty much never, ever, like not just a stand-up edge rusher at 300 pounds.
Right.
You're never going to see that in the NFL. It's a weird little like quirky thing that they did at Bowling Green because he was easily their best player by a mile. I mean, he was what? I think I remember reading he's a 5-year or 4-year starter at Bowling Green.
5-year starter.
He's led the team in sacks every single year he was there, which is just, or led the team in sacks 4 of the 5 years he was there, which is just insane.
He may have led them, and maybe his pressures or something, for 5 straight years. But yeah, he's been kind of the man on their defense for a while.
Yeah, and the thing is, he really lined up at edge a lot, like either over the tackle, so in more of a 4-4-I, and then outside the tackle, pretty much at a 50-50 split his last 2 years in college. So only 8% of his snaps were in the A or B gaps where he'll presumably be playing at Green Bay. So that's kind of some things like, can he translate to the interior? That is definitely a question. He has like the build that you would think so. But it's definitely a question because he didn't really do it as much in college.
I mean, you watch looking him out on the field, and he looks like a D tackle.
He's built like a D tackle.
He's built like he's a big, thick guy.
But he rushes out of the 2-point stance a bunch and like rushes over the tackle a lot. So it's just something to keep in mind that his alignment in college is not going to be the same as his alignment in the pros. Then, however, this is a guy who just he played against not the highest level of competition, but he dominated that competition. He was the highest graded edge rusher in 2022 at any level. Right?
Right. So that's all of the edge rushers last year in the NCAA. And he was their highest rated edge rusher. And then I looked, so let's look at the whole front seven, because is he a D tackle or is he
that's what this says.
An edge rusher? And so then I looked at the D tackle to see, is there anybody as an interior D lineman in PFF who has a higher grade? And there's one, and that's Dante Corleone from Cincinnati, who is coming out in another year or two.
Yeah.
But he is the only one who had a better defensive grade among all of the defensive front players.
Yes. He had 4 straight seasons with an 80-plus PFF pass rush grade, which is crazy. 160 career pressures with 30 career sacks, a career pressure rate of 14%, up to 17.9% in final year, and a pass rush win rate of 23.8% in his last year, which is insane. So he's beating his man 1 out of 4 times, which is wild. Not as good against the run until his last year. 69 career run stops for a stop rate of 5.4%, but up to 8.5% in his final year, so he did get better against the run in his last year, which is good to know.
Yeah, and his overall run grade for his last year was elite. Before that, he had like 3 of the 4 years were pretty good. In the green, as it were, in the 70s. And then, but his overall run defense in his last year was 90%. Well, the 90.3 grade, I should say. Though he still had kind of similar to Colby Wooden, like final year missed tackle rate.
Yeah. I mean,
jumped up.
It did jump up.
They're just preparing for their future with the Packers.
I was going to say, to play for the Packers? Hey, 2 years ago, we were good tacklers. Excuse me.
Packers are looking at this guys like, that's our guy.
Hey, I could see him in
I
goal.
like the cut of his giblets. But it is true. People have bemoaned the fact that how can we expect them to get better tackling? It's like, well, they did it just 2 years ago.
Top 3 tackling
Remember
team in the league.
all this thing we heard in like training camp stuff about Joe Barry showing them to tackle, like diving on the donut and showing them how to tackle?
Yep, it's true.
He needed to do that again last year.
Yeah, that's exactly. That's just do that every year and we'll figure it out eventually. He did feast on lower competition in the MAC, like we said. He was not as impactful against higher competition like UCLA or Mississippi State. Didn't have any sacks in either of those games. But did get 5 pressures and 29 pass rushes against UCLA. So that's essentially 1 in 6. That's around
so that's
17%.
That's pretty good.
It's like a 17-16% win rate.
That's actually quite good. But the Mississippi State, he had 0 pressures. But
but you were saying he got.
I watched the
doubled,
tape,
right?
and they're like they got 2 or 3 guys on him, and he's just.
I mean, that's what happens when you're playing against a good team and you're clearly the best player. It's like, okay, we can block these other 4 guys with 3 dudes, and we're just gonna focus all our attention on this one guy who's going to the league.
We only need 3 guys to block your 4 teammates.
Yeah, it's like this guy's going to the league. These other 3 guys are not. Like, that's kind of how it went. But so, and he did force 6 fumbles and batted 4 balls for his career. I thought watching his reps at the Senior Bowl that he generally won a lot of those reps. I know he didn't like his speed testing at the Senior Bowl was whatever in terms of on-field speed, but I thought in his one-on-ones, I thought he was beating all the guys they put against him. He might have lost a rep I watched, but I thought he won most of those
guys. And also, if I'm remembering correctly, in like sort of the 11 and 11s, he was doing very well rushing from the inside in those.
Yeah, and I thought he was. I mean, pardon me, I thought he was kicking ass out there. But anyway, so tons of production. Like we said, just pressures on pressures on pressures. 160 career pressures is crazy. Banana pants crazy. And you just watch him, and he's so much fun to watch. I mean, he's such a weird player because you don't see 300-pound stand-up edge rushers. And he's not going to be that in the NFL. But it's just, he's really fun to watch. And to get a player that dominated in college in the 6th round is really exciting. Some scout quotes for him. Dane Brugler of The Athletic had him as defensive tackle 16 with a 5th round grade. Quote, Brooks has a unique package of tools which creates questions about his ideal position fit, but he has the light feet and urgent hands to be a gap disruptor. He projects best as a 3 technique who can be flexed up and down the line. And then Lance Zierlein of The Athletic, quote, Brooks' snap quickness, footwork, hand usage, and motor are all translatable play qualities. That's the other thing. You listen to any scout talk about him, and they all talk about how his motor is off the charts. Like, he is going 100% all the time. Let me continue that quote, though. Quote, his movement and counters are intuitive, allowing for quick access into the backfield. Against the pass, he frequently beat tackles as a bull rusher off the edge. Brooks has the size of a 3 technique, but the versatility and athleticism to move around a defensive front. He flashes disruptive 3-down talent as a future starter in a 1-gap scheme. And then PFF had him as defensive tackle 16 and 99th overall on their entire big board. So something to keep in mind is general thoughts on him from the scouting community are he's super skilled. Like, number 1, really good with his hands, really good pass rush plan, variety of moves. And the question is just athleticism and level of competition. And the athleticism questions kind of, if we want to just get into our thoughts, I'll start. It kind of almost gives me an Egbare vibes, where I watch him play football and I'm like, this guy is insane. And then the athleticism testing is, shoot, is he going to be able to do that against NFL players? And Egbare was able to. The difference is Egbare played against like ACC level, SEC level, SEC level. He was
playing at a much higher level when you saw him win. Yeah. So then you have fewer questions about what he's winning against.
Exactly. And then Karl Brooks obviously is playing at Bowling Green, playing in the MAC. But the MAC does send players to the NFL. I've hearing a lot of MAC slander. I mean, Western Michigan sends guys all the time. Cody Mock this year, offensive lineman, was out of the MAC. He went in the second round. Wasn't he?
That's not the MAC. He was at North Dakota State.
I am not so sure about that one. Cody Mock. Oh, no, you're right. Cody Mock did go to North Dakota State. There was another player that was from the MAC that was an offensive lineman then. But anyway, players get sent to the league from the MAC all the time, out of Western Michigan, out of Bowling Green. There's another big school there as well. Central Michigan was the one I was thinking of. Players get sent from Central Michigan all the time. University of Buffalo sent players. Northern Illinois sends players.
Jake Witt. Where did he go?
That was Witt. Okay, Witt was the Central Michigan one, I think. Was the one I was thinking of.
Because he tested very well in his pro day as an elite athlete, as an offensive tackle. And I don't remember where he got drafted. That was somebody I was thinking the Packers could get as a late round flyer.
I know he was Northern Michigan.
Northern
but anyway,
Michigan. Directional
there's
Michigan.
a lot of Michigan schools. But anyway, MAC is not the best competition, but it is still D1. The things that I felt for Brooks, though, is I'm honestly more excited about him than Wooden. Yes, he isn't a great athlete. Like I said, similar ideas as Enigbari. And like I said, just fun to watch. I'm not sure how it's going to translate to the NFL, but it's a 6th-round pick, and I'm fine with taking that bet on a guy who crushed every single time he stepped on the football field, even if it wasn't against. I think he's going to be a guy who just kills everyone in preseason. I think he is going to step in the preseason and just ball out and just kill everyone on the field in preseason. The question is, if he goes against like real high-level NFL-level talent, is that going to happen at all? Maybe not. But at least in preseason, I don't think they're going to be able to block him.
I am very interested to hear when things start coming out of training camp, when the one-on-ones, the pass rush one-on-ones in practices, how he's doing against the...
I almost just gave a player on the roster an unnecessary drive-by, and I'm not going to do that. Not going to do it.
Okay, we'll hold back on that.
But anyway, do you want to talk a little bit about what you thought about him?
Okay, so my initial thoughts were his tape looks really great and against lower competition. So he's really able to penetrate and then close on the QB quickly when he gets close.
He's got
his ability to convert pressure to...
For a guy that is not an elite athlete, he's closing to the quarterback pretty quick.
Yeah, he closes and converts pressures to sacks at a decent clip as well, I think. My main concern is he going to end up being like Shamar Jean-Charles, where here's a guy who looked great against lower competition, didn't test well, and hasn't been able to see the field. That's, I think, the floor. That's the downside for his profile. Now, here's some arguments against that. Jean-Charles' PFF grades were good, but they were in the low 80s as opposed to in the 90s, like Brooks, where it's elite grade. And his RAS was even worse, where he was like 42, so below average, 4.24, as opposed to Brooks, who was slightly above average at 5.87.
Can I push back a little, though? I think there is...
Are you going to push back against my pushback? Or are you...
I think there is a... the comparison. I think there is a higher bar of, like, football knowledge required to play corner than there is D-tackle. I think there is a higher, like, football acumen needed to play corner in terms of understanding coverages. Defensive tackle, if they can't understand, like I'm not saying this is an issue for Brooks, but hypothetically, if there's not the same bar, because at the end of the day, go beat the guy in front of you. Like, that's all you have to do.
But I think my guess, the main thing for Jean-Charles, for example, is he just doesn't have, like, the foot speed to keep up.
And even Jean-Charles,
his agility is not
even
that
Jean-Charles,
good.
though, when healthy, I thought looked pretty good this year. My opinion.
Okay.
But
he just has. I feel like he hasn't got much opportunity.
Different positions. I just don't think you can really.
It's more about the vibe you get.
Okay. All right.
That's all. And though I think but there are some aspects of his profile that don't perfectly mirror what Jean-Charles was as a corner. One thing that's interesting is, in terms of my thoughts, so they've got two defensive lineman picks. It's interesting that they did not pick up a run stuffer.
Yeah.
They did not get a big run stuffing D lineman, even as a flyer in the 7th round with the 3rd one.
Yeah.
They went for two kind of gap penetrating edge rushers.
3 of their 5 top defensive linemen project to not be good at defending the run. In terms of like Wyatt Wooden and Brooks are not currently plus run defenders. Like, it is what it is.
Wyatt's not that bad.
He wasn't that good last year. There's a reason he didn't play, was because they didn't feel like he could defend the run, is pretty much what Joe Barry said.
Oh, well, he graded better than Kenny last year.
In not so many... Yeah, but we've seen Kenny do it. Kenny had a bad year last year.
He did.
But in not so many words, but Barry essentially said that the reason Wyatt didn't play is because he needs to improve against the run. In not so many words.
Yeah, but one thing they did that are a little different is that I picked the kind of the highly productive small school guy and paired him with a very athletic SEC guy, but both
who was also productive.
Who was
fair.
Not as productive, but productive.
No. It's hard to be as productive as Brooks was.
No, he was the most productive for the D tackle in the country.
Yeah, and the Packers are clearly excited about him as well. Director of Football Operations, Milt Hendrickson, this is from Packers Wire, quote, What he was able to display even against the MAC, you turn on the tape and he was a man amongst boys. When you see players from non-Power 5 or FCS schools, you want to see them dominate, and you can put on the tape and see that kid dominate for stretches. End quote. So yeah, that's the thing. Is like, yes, he played against worse competition, but he kicked their ass. So it's like, all right, fair enough.
He did what you want him to. Yeah, he did what you want somebody to do. Kind of like Tucker Kraft running over tacklers.
You and me, same page.
Yeah, same thing.
Yeah.
Lead athlete, make the players on the other team look like children.
Exactly. Is there anything else you wanted to add for Brooks before we kind of talk?
So in terms
a
of
little bit about pick value.
Yeah, so in terms of where he was taken, he was the 15th defensive tackle overall. And that's counting Colby Wooden as a defensive tackle when they were listing him as a defensive end on some sites. And the next D tackles taken were not all that inspiring to me. I mean, some of the ones that were the next four, I was like, yeah, I'm not that interested. Some of the later ones, like Nate Jade Silvera and Moro Ajomo, who were taken, I think, in both in the 7th round, were sound a little more interesting. But they could have gone to other positions, like J.L. Skinner, if they wanted to get another safety.
Yep.
Or get safety earlier.
He had injury concerns, though, is the thing.
He had the torn pec, so he couldn't work out. And I don't know what other injuries he had. Or Luke Whippler, center from Ohio State, if they wanted some center competition. He was kind of interesting. Mm-hmm. And then other receivers, like A.T. Perry, who lasted all the way into the 6th round, would have been another pick I would have also been happy with.
They had already taken 2 receivers at this point.
Yes, but they did end up taking a 3rd.
This is true. Yeah, and they could have taken, like you said, Xavier Hutchinson was also there, it looks like you said, and Andre Yoshevas out of Princeton was also there.
Yeah, so there are a couple of receivers that were intriguing athletic profiles and productive players who were there. If they wanted
to go another position. But I think D tackle
so it would have to be you get a different D tackle later.
Yeah, because
they would definitely need another one.
Exactly. They needed another defensive tackle. But I think overall, just looking at these 2 players, I like the bets on production. I understand them. I like doubling up at defensive tackle. And I'm excited to see what they can do. I'm a little more excited for Brooks. I think he might take a little more time, but I just watching him play is very exciting, and I think he's gonna be really fun to watch player in preseason, if nothing else. And then Wooden's already getting some reps with the ones, with some players not being there, and then also with just not having many players for those snaps. So I think it's really exciting.
I actually think we're going to see both of them play a decent amount because of the number of players we have at the position.
Yeah, we're going to see, I think, this whole draft class play a lot this year because this is a really young team. It's one of the youngest teams in the league. They only have 3 players who are over 30 years old. The rookies are going to play.
They have converted a lot of their roster in the last 2 years to younger players. They've completely remade the receiver room, as in no one's left from just 2 years ago.
No one's left. And it's an exciting time to be a Packers fan with all these young players.
And the defensive line has been remade in the last couple of years.
Yep.
As
it's
well.
Just Kenny left pretty much.
Yep.
Linebacker room's all different. Safety room's going to be really different. O-line's going to be probably the thing that's the most similar.
Right. Though they've added a bunch of new players, but they have, I think, a lot of preferred starters at many positions still around.
Yes. And I think that's going to be the thing. Is this is going to be a year that there's going to be times where it's really frustrating, and there's going to be times where it's really exciting. But I think overall, we just got to be focused on development and youth this year, and more than anything, just kind of getting everyone on the same page and growing together. But thank you so much for listening to this breakdown of OTAs and Colby Wooden and Karl Brooks. We really appreciate you coming and listening. And if you like what you heard, like we said earlier, come give us a follow on Twitter at FatherSonPacker. Come subscribe, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. Would really help our numbers. We're going to be doing episodes breaking down the rest of the draft class in the coming weeks. Still got to talk about Clifford, Carlson, Valentine, Nichols, Johnson, and Bose. So all those guys to come. And then we're going to talk about any other news coming across the desk, any new signings, any new OTA news, etc., etc. So come listen for that. Come give us a follow on Twitter. Thanks so much for listening. And until next time, go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.